Welcome to episode 9 of the Strategic Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Steele. In every episode, we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders and how they've been able to break through their business inertia and propel their business forward. We don't often recognize the role that emotions play with respect to behavior and decisions in a business environment, but they're actually quite significant. Although many may believe that we're primarily motivated by our own thoughts or cognition, the reality is that our emotions are motivational. They are the fuel that creates momentum. Because emotions are our most powerful motivators, especially emotions like fear and shame. It's critical that we grasp their impact so that we can better communicate with others and gain an advantage in business. To help us understand these emotions, we are joined by Dr. Mary Lamia, a psychologist and author who has spent her career encouraging emotional awareness in adults, adolescents, and preteens. She's the author of What Motivates Getting Things Done, Procrastination, Emotions, and Success, Emotions, Making Sense of Your Feelings and Understanding Myself, a kid's guide to intense emotions and strong feelings. Dr. Lamia, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Connie.
You've written extensively about the impact of our emotions on who we are and how to help us better understand them. So what would be great is to tell us a little bit more about how this particular topic became a passion of yours.
Well, I've been studying emotions and how they make us work and how we function and the importance of emotions and emotional memories in our lives. And I've been disseminating information about psychology to the public throughout my 40 years of being a psychologist because public information is important. I think people should know how they function, how they work. They should know something about their emotions and know something about psychology. And taking psychology to the public has just been something that I feel is essential. But in the last number of years, I've written books on emotions for children and young adults and found that it's been useful. The feedback I've gotten is, wow, I didn't know this, and this really helps me in my life every single day. Interesting to me that many psychologists don't understand how emotions work. They focus on symptoms or an emotion somebody feels that creates a symptom, but don't really understand what emotions really are. For example, a lot of people think we're just motivated by positive emotion, and the positive psychology movement has sort of promoted that, even though the positive psychology movement doesn't have anything to do with that. It's really about resilience. But people have grabbed onto that as though we should feel positive and our pride should motivate us. But even pride it sounds like a cognition actually, but it's really based on emotion. But it's a complex process.
That is an interesting point, to be motivated by these negative emotions, so you speak, which actually is a great lead into my next question, which was talking about the role of emotions when it comes to a business environment. And as we all know, unfortunately, there can be lots of negative emotions that impact people. And in some of my previous podcasts, many of the guests indicated as fear being one of the prevailing reasons that organizations and people within them face an inability to move or change. And this is even in the face of very rational arguments that highlight the benefits of doing something that can improve their situation. So from your expertise and research, do you also feel that this emotion is the primary driver in creating this inertia, this negative one?
Labeling emotions as positive or negative has nothing to do with their value. Instead, it involves how they motivate us by the way they make us feel. So negative emotions like fear, distress, anger, disgust, shame motivate us to do something to avoid experiencing them, or they urge us to behave in ways that will relieve us of their effects. They're not good or bad or right or wrong or something we should avoid or embrace. They're motivators. Simple as that. So we have all of these innate emotions. And as we grow from infancy and have experiences, and based on our culture and society at the time, we link those core emotions with experiences we have, and they form emotional memories. That huge warehouse of emotional memories we have inside our brain as we grow, and it gets bigger and bigger, help determine how we respond in the present to an event or a situation or something that happens to us. So basically, we have these core emotions we're born with, and then we learn how to deal with them. And they help us become who we are. Actually, personality traits, beliefs, how we deal with people and situations are all based on our emotional experiences. And when an emotion gets triggered in the present, it instantaneously accesses every emotional memory we've had that relates to that kind of situation and gives us information about how we're supposed to respond. It makes us feel something that leads us to respond. So back to fear. One of the things about fear is that people talk about it, and yet fear and anxiety become kind of interchangeable.
Yes. What was interesting is nobody talked about anxiety. They only talked about fear. But I know in your book, you talk about fear and anxiety, and that they are a lot of times inextricably tied to each other.
Well, yes. And, actually, as an emotion, fear is generally considered a reaction to something that's immediate, that threatens our security or our safety. Fear alerts us to the possibility that we might be harmed in some way or lose something, which in turn motivates us to protect ourselves. Although fear is really immediate, it can be activated in rapid succession, or it can oscillate with other emotions. And that kind of oscillation is often what we refer to as anxiety. So let's say you want to extend your risk in terms of a business venture, and you begin to experience restless sleep or agitation or a rapid heartbeat. Are you experiencing fear? Probably not solely. Anxiety is a general state of distress, and it's longer lasting than fear, and it's usually triggered by something that's not specific. Even though we think it's specific, we give it a target because our cognitions always join our emotion to give us a little bit more information about what's going on. They're not always right. So, a business venture could be a very good thing, and our cognition could make us question it. And yet, that's based on our emotional memories, too. So, now clarifying the difference between anxiety and fear is that fear commingles with other emotions to produce the different kinds of anxiety we experience in our lives. So, if you're agitated and annoyed or upset, it's usually the commingling of the emotion of fear and the emotion of distress. Fear and excitement can oscillate and merge together to produce an emotion. And that is like if you're both excited and fearful about doing something. If you have both those things, roller coaster ride for kids, or meeting a new romantic interest, starting a new venture, there's fear and excitement. And that kind of anxiety can feel good at one moment and it can feel bad at another. Fear and disgust mingle and they form disgust anxiety. And that's the fear of that you will be disgusting, like you'll smell bad after a run, and so you better not meet a friend, or the fear of encountering something disgusting. But the biggest one in terms of business, I find, is the commingling of fear and shame, which produces what we refer to as shame anxiety. shame anxiety is amazing as a motivator, and people are so afraid of it. Fear and shame, when they mingle together, accompanies a thought that you're going to fail. And they're a huge source of motivation for a lot of successful people because remember, negative emotions motivate us to do something to avoid experiencing them, or they urge us to behave in ways to relieve their effects. So it could stop you too.
Yes. And so when I read your book and went to that topic of shame anxiety, which you talk about being the combination of fear and distress and shame, I immediately went to all those negative behaviors that I've encountered, which I'm sure many of us have encountered throughout our careers. And you talked about some of them where it could be the impediments to learning, it could be the obstructions to motivations to achieve, like people avoiding things altogether when you want them to engage with you, or withdrawing completely, or the worst situation is attacking others. And
oh, absolutely. Shame anxiety is experienced that it's sort of like a fear that exposure is imminent and humiliation will soon follow. So when you experience this intense emotion, it sort of signals to you that you better take action right away to diminish its intensity. Otherwise, something bad is going to happen. But again, it's a powerful, powerful motivating force. Every single high achiever I studied said they have high shame anxiety. They didn't call it that. What they called it is the cognition associated with shame anxiety, a fear of failure. You ask successful people if they have a fear of failure, and if they think about it for a second, every one of them will say yes. At least the ones I interviewed did. You're compelled or eventually compelled to do something or get something done in order to get rid of the effects of shame anxiety. It has a great purpose. It really, really is motivating because shame motivates us to save face. Shame is a signal that we have experienced some disconnection or we've experienced a loss of positive feeling or we will experience it. And it puts us on very high alert. Fear avoidance and shame avoidance are ways evolution's given humans useful tools to reach desired goals.
Do you also feel that culture and environment, which there's been a lot of discussion on having the right corporate culture these days versus, for example, always hiring for the specific aptitude. It's about that culture and that fit. Do you feel if that you're in an environment where shaming someone to motivate them to do something, which could be perceived as negative?
Oh, that's different. Yes, that is different. Oh, my goodness, yes. If you're in an environment where, let's say, your CEO tends to shame people for what they do or don't do well enough as far as the CEO is concerned, that is so negatively motivating. You know, we should not shame people. That's attacking people. And there are 4 basic responses to shame. Withdrawal, like withdrawing effort, or avoidance, going home and having a drink, attacking oneself, feeling like you're inadequate, or attacking others. And so if a CEO, let's say, has a tendency to feel shame, him or herself, and attacks employees to get rid of his or her own shame and put it onto other people, that's very negative. That makes for a very bad culture. Shaming people does not work.
What can someone do in those situations when that is the environment where many people may feel like their only avenue is an out? So if whether it's the CEO or whether it's potentially a peer or whether it's a client for that matter. And so this in shame, anxiety, the way they're manifesting their behavior fundamentally impacts the relationship. And so the relationship itself is taking a very contentious tone. What can people even do to change that? Is there something people can do?
Well, shame itself is different than shame anxiety. I think if somebody shames you, it's very, very important to point out that you are feeling shame. Their intent may not be to shame you. You may feel shame from what they said or did, but that may not be their intent. So it's important to figure that out initially. But if you're in a culture where somebody tends to shame others, I think it's important to point that out to them and to point out that that does not motivate you. Shame, on the other hand, and shame anxiety, are great teachers, because when we feel shame, it also motivates us to look inside and learn and to do something differently. But if it's done in a harsh way where you don't feel the other person also respects you, it's hard to learn from it. Instead, you tend to respond with one of the defensive reactions to shame, which is, withdrawal or avoidance or attacking yourself or attacking somebody else. So you go home and you talk to your partner about what a horrible employer you have, rather than looking at yourself and learning about what you can do better so that you can succeed. In our culture, we have shame kind of built in too. I mean, look what we do to kids. Kids are often shamed for getting a C instead of an A, or for failing, rather than helping them understand, what is really going on. So people learn to hide when they experience shame. So maybe they don't interact with the CEO so much, or they don't interact with their peers, or they keep everything to themselves because they have this fear of exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So it can make a corporate culture very ugly. Even the idea that, where people are always looking at the next thing or the next position, and that's so prominent these days, moving up, moving forward. And there's a lot of shame that's felt if you don't. And then you have to take a look at, well, are you being realistic, about your goals, or are you not being realistic? And if you experience shame because you don't get to that next level, do you attack, or do you learn from it?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you realign yourself in some ways with the goal?
Absolutely.
So people who fear may avoid taking risks, even if they're understandable risks. I mean, they may help us reach our goals, and that other perceive as benign, but they may be fearful about taking them. And emotional memories that have to do with fear are very important here, because when fear is activated in the present, it taps into all of our emotional memories. And if we have a lot of emotional memories where we have moved forward in business or our lives in some way, and we felt shamed or handicapped in some way, or hurt or embarrassed, then we may be a little bit anxious about moving forward.
That point that you made, fear of fear, so resonates with me, because what I'm seeing these days, change is normal these days. And I get the reaction of many organizations that there is this constant fear of fear, because the dynamics of the business landscape is never stagnant anymore. So, that the comment that you made just so resonates, because I'm sure a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that they're fearful. It's somewhat, people may feel shameful.
They have the shame of fear. Absolutely. Absolutely. People fear shame, and they have the shame of fear. And so they can't acknowledge any anxiety they have about a situation, or about moving forward, or about taking a step.
If you admit you're fearful of taking on something new, or just showing emotion like that, it's a sign of weakness, versus a potential sign of strength, that you're being honest with yourself, you're being introspective, and that you're trying to think through how to positively take away that feeling of fear, and then maybe finding a way to collectively work with people and develop that unified solution. When people experience the fear, more often I see the negative behavior where the fear of the judgment or attacking or conflict or the risk avoidance tends to be quite significant. So you have barriers upon barriers of several people across the board, which makes it so difficult to feel like you can move things forward in the way that could have a real positive impact.
Unless we learn to, first of all, accept that we are experiencing a certain emotion, we will never learn from it. We have to accept what we feel in order to take a look at it. Think about, what is it as a source of information? What is this emotion attempting to tell me? What thoughts, cognitions am I attributing to it? Why is it keeping me from my goal or helping me approach my goal? But if you try to refute or avoid an emotion, you're in trouble because, evolution has given us this incredible system of information. Why not use it to our advantage? Because people who can understand their emotions do have an advantage, especially in business. But it gets very complex, and this is why it's important to understand. For example, just recently, a woman came to see me as a patient who was feeling highly, highly anxious about a financial decision she was thinking about making. And she had two big chunks of money. One of them was invested in the market for the last year, and it was doing really, really, really well. And she was talking to her friends, and the other chunk was in a safe place, making low interest in the bank. She was talking to friends and others and colleagues and who were all talking about the market and investing all their money in it. And all of a sudden, she wasn't sleeping. She was anxious all the time, thinking the cognition she ascribed to it was that she was really going to lose out if she did not invest all of this other money into the market. And, should she do it? Shouldn't she do it? She was having a very hard time. She's breaking out in hives practically,
Oh, no.
thinking about this decision. It was horrible for her. And this is a very, very, very intelligent businesswoman. And she was falling to pieces based on this decision she had to make. So her momentum just stopped. She was stopped dead in her tracks. She couldn't do anything about this. And so she came to see me, not wanting me to make the decision for her, but wanting me to help her get rid of her anxiety. Well, instead of getting rid of her anxiety, we took a look at what her anxiety was all about. Interestingly enough, she did not feel this anxiety until she started thinking, based on her relationships with her colleagues and friends, that she should invest this safe money. That's where her anxiety started. Her anxiety was not about, oh my goodness, if you don't invest this money, you won't make more money. It was more about, if you invest this money, you could lose it. And she became terrified that if she put it in the market, she might make money for a while, and then if the market crashed, she would lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
So her anxiety was actually telling her to be careful. Her anxiety came up with the thought of investing all of her money in the market, not about not making money. And so she took a look at that, and she decided that the decision she had made in the first place to keep part of it safe was best for her, because she didn't want to take a huge risk at this time in her life. And yet, when she felt compelled to take that huge risk, her emotions got triggered. She began to become afraid of what she was feeling, which is why she couldn't sleep. And instead of looking at it, she was just buzzing with the emotion.
So this level of introspection, so to speak, and you walking through that with them and getting to the core of what was driving that anxiety. Why do you think people are not as aware of that in a business environment? Why do you feel it's people's first instinct to just react without taking into account how the other person they're dealing with will feel and will respond in kind, which again creates a situation of tension and inertia and not being able to bring things forward?
Well, and we generally think that the best course of action is to suppress an emotion or ignore an emotion or to get rid of it rather than figure it out. But emotions are really complicated, and it's been only in the past 20 years or so that we have really focused on emotions and how they work and what they are and help people become more aware of them. We haven't given them, we have given the primacy to cognition, thinking about things, logically figuring them out, when in fact, cognition really is uninformed without emotion. So it takes both to make us aware and to help us make good decisions and move forward. And so, rather than feel an emotion and say, well, I can't move forward on this because I'm afraid and that's what's happening and I want to get rid of that feeling, so I'm just not going to do it. I mean, what a mistake that is, rather than see it as momentum. Emotion is momentum. It is motivation. We are not motivated without our emotions. We can think. A lot of people think they're motivated by their thoughts, like positive thoughts, like I mentioned pride earlier. People think pride is a cognition, a thought. I want to get these things done, and I want to do these things, and my momentum is created by my thoughts of experiencing future pride when this happens. That is not a cognition. When we anticipate experiencing future pride, that taps into our warehouse of emotional memories where pride based on achievement was felt before, whether it's seeing the glow in our parents' eyes, the gleam in our parents' eyes when we first walked, or getting an A in school. Every emotional memory where we have felt proud comes forth and fuels our effort to move forward. So pride is not cognitive. It taps into our emotional memories when we anticipate pride. So that's momentum.
Mm-hmm. And I love that point of pride, because when I think of a common reaction by people on what it is they may do, it's out of some insecurity they may have. Think about a particular quote in your book, which was, emotions can be impervious to cognition, which is why change through communication, instruction, or persuasion are not successful. That helps me, and I think would help a lot of people better understand how to engage with that other person, because the natural inclination is to just throw out more facts. It's more data.
Throw out more facts or throw out an organizational structure that helps them put important information together, and it's all cognitive. But, that's all motivated by emotion. Emotions give us the octane to get things done. They fuel our efforts, and yet they don't always feel good, but that's how they work.
Well, what advice would you have for folks to better understand their emotional style so they can better build relationships with other people? And maybe the person already has it, but the one that they're interacting with doesn't have that level of awareness. What would you recommend?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote What Motivates Getting Things Done is because I wanted people to learn about emotions, and it is a short course on how our emotions work. But I also wanted people to understand relating to others who may have a different kind of motivation than their own based on their emotions and the interferences that may happen in those kinds of situations. Because emotions, understanding our emotions not only helps us with ourselves, it helps us in relation to others and understanding them and interacting with them. So I would say, the number one thing is to just learn about your emotions and how they work. Whatever you do to learn about them. You could look them up on the internet and learn about them. But it's just very, very important. But the main thing to consider is that negative emotions like fear, people get hung up on negative emotions thinking they're bad when in fact they're just a different way to motivate us. When an emotion gets activated in us, it's sort of like the notifications that appear on your computer screen, while you're working away, and you get this notification, and it makes us pay attention to it. We pay attention to it. Our attention gets directed that way. That's what emotions are. They direct our attention. They're an attention-gathering device. And so if there's a stimulus, like a notification, on your computer screen, in your environment, it'll activate an emotion that makes you pay attention to the stimulus. So just like those notifications on your computer screen, you could ignore it or avoid it or take a look at it and see what it's trying to tell you. And that's how it works with us. An emotion is activated and we pay attention and we decide what to do about it. Mm-hmm. If we're going to pay real attention to it, if we're just going to let it go for the moment. And we're not conscious of all the emotions that are activated in us that make us pay attention to the myriad of stimuli in the environment. But we're very conscious of some of them. And those are really important to take a look. Why is your attention drawn to that event or thing or person or stimulus?
Mm-hmm. And another thing I want to bring up from your book, when you talk about these interpersonal situations, these intense emotions, there are ways to figure out the communications with those folks.
Before you start understanding your own emotions and somebody else's in the workplace, it's really important to have also some tools with how to communicate with others. So the first one has to do with accepting the other person for who or she is at the moment. And we so much want other people to be like us. There is no way another person can be like us because they are their own warehouse of emotional memories that created their personality. It's also important to listen and invite the other person to express themselves, to reveal themselves. We are so intent on putting forth what we think that we don't take the time first to listen to the other person and what it is they think. And if we can just hold off and let the person reveal him or herself, we get a better sense of what's going on in the picture. The next step is be aware of the mood of the communication, because the tone of the discussion is very, very, very important. And so this enables you to be in contact with the other person at an emotional level. We could be in contact with another person on a cognitive level when we're exchanging ideas. But if we have a connection that feels emotional, you don't have to be well aware of it, but it's a sense of communication that is felt rather than in our heads. We're more likely to be able to have a dialogue. And we tend to evaluate other people in terms of our own standards, and that is really important too. To not try to convince somebody of your point of view or evaluate what they're saying in terms of your standards, but instead to measure your own standards against what the other person is saying.
Great. Well, that last point I think is also a fascinating one too that you've brought up, because I feel that many organizations have this tendency to look at things from the inside out and not really account for things from the outside in.
Yeah, it's mutual respect and cooperation and trust in the exchange of ideas, and to have behind that the feeling that is the glue that allows you to listen.
What last advice would you have for anyone who could optimize their own personal style so they're as effective as they can be and so that they can create that strategic momentum for themselves?
It's, of course, modified by their culture and experiences and their previous responses to situation. So there are people where certain levels of anxiety may contribute to their success, and other people where, it's not optimal for them, and they have to do what they can to be aware of it so that they can regulate it better.
Mm-hmm.
Understand emotions and how they work for you. That's what it boils down to. It really boils down to that.
Absolutely. And lastly, can you tell us what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Well, I have a website, marylamia.com, MaryLamia.com, or they could look for me on Psychology Today. I have a series of blog posts there. My website will link them to all of that as well, and to my books.
That's wonderful. Well, we really appreciate you being on the show today. And I certainly learned a significant amount from reading your book. And I hope everyone has the opportunity to also take the opportunity to read Dr. Lamia's book, What It Takes to Get Things Done. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Connie. Wonderful to speak with you.
We need to accept and understand our own emotions in order to learn from them. And as business leaders, we definitely should make an effort to learn from our emotions. Not only will a better grasp of what motivates you help you build more strategic momentum, but understanding other people's motivational styles will enable you to be more effective in navigating relationships with others. Like Dr. Lamia said, quote, understand emotions and how they work for you. It really boils down to that. Unquote. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can learn more about Dr. Lamia and connect with her at marylamia.com. That's MaryLamia.com. If you want to hear previous episodes or even get show notes from this episode, visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.